Hey everyone, it's Nicole. Today I'm here to wrap up the reading month of October and November. Looking back into it, I didn't read a lot of books, but still I feel like I've read a solid amount because most of the things that I've read I love, which I guess determines a good reading month or month in this situation. The first book that I've read was a historical young adult fiction, which is the first time I encountered this subgenre. The book that I picked up was Silhouette of the Sparrow by Beth Griffin. I've heard quite a few good things about it from people that I admire and love. It is set in the beginning or in the middle of 20th century in America and follows a young girl on the journey of discovering her true self. I believe you've heard this summary before a couple of times at least. You probably read great books with this exact summary. The interesting detail about this novel, though, is that the protagonist has an interesting hobby. She cuts silhouettes of birds from paper. Basically, it's her way to preserve their beauty. She's very into science, nature, birds, which her mother doesn't approve of because she wants to marry her off and to do it as quickly as possible. And in a desperate move to separate the protagonist from her masculine hobbies, her mother decides to send her away to her aunt and cousin, so our protagonist could learn a few feminine hobbies and maybe browse for some marriage opportunities. But the girl obviously sees it as an opportunity to be free from her mother's tyranny, so instead of doing what her mother wants her to do, she starts exploring the world around her. She does interesting things and meets interesting people, including a girl who's a flapper, and she falls in love with her. I found this novel charming, to be honest. I loved most of the elements that were included. For example, the protagonist's hobby was well woven into the plot of the book. It made sense. Also, I loved the characterization of certain characters, and overall, I had a positive experience with this book, though I gave it 3 stars, because some parts of the plot seemed absolutely unrealistic to me. Obviously, the characters of this book are very young, but still they embark on a very adult things in their lives in a manner that seems absolutely unrealistic. If you cannot suspend your disbelief when you're reading a novel, it means that there's something wrong with it. Overall, it's a great read. If not for this tiny detail, maybe you will be able to suspend your disbelief. It didn't work for me. You will probably enjoy it even more than me if you will be able to do it. The next book that I picked up was The Perks of Being Wallflower by Chbosky, and who knew that it's going to be such a failure? I know that I'm going to get a lot of thumbs down, and I also realized that a lot of you read it when you were teenagers and you didn't see any faults with it, because when you're young you don't read critically, period, and you don't see a lot of things that are problematic in this book. I understand what Chbosky wanted to convey with this book and why he chose the format that he chose, but this format is frankly insufferable. We're presented with the story from the point of view of a teenage boy, and teenage boys are terrible. The amount of cringe-worthy things he writes in his journal just make me want to vomit, and not in a good way. So this book is really not catered to my interests, and the amount of problematic things described in this story just made me unable to finish the book. I think I've read a half of it, a good half. I gave it a good chance and I just couldn't get past it. There were a couple of scenes that turned my stomach. For example, when the protagonist's sister is dating a guy and teases him constantly for some reason, and then he hits her, and that's where she falls in love with him. I didn't have a good experience with this book, and I will just give it away to people that loved it for some reason. I still don't understand why. Then after the disappointment with The Perks of Being Wallflower, I decided to pick up something that I knew I'm going to love. It was Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo, which is the second book in Six of Crows series. I love the first book, so I knew that I'm going to love the second book as well. It is a perfect young adult fantasy read. Also, I think that people who read a lot of adult fantasy have a big chance of enjoying it as well. It's a story about a group of criminals from different backgrounds who are taking a well-paid job to break out a dangerous scientist out of an unbreakable prison. If I had a couple of complaints about the first book, the second book just swept me off my feet. I believe there were a few things I could discuss and say that I wasn't quite satisfied with them, but it wouldn't be the truth because I didn't even notice them because I enjoyed the story so much. And I think it's a great sign. I'm going to make a full review of the series because I love them so much and I have a lot to talk about. I just want to mention that I was way happier with the ending of the series than I was with Shadow and Bone, which is a series improvement. Despite the fact that it was bittersweet, I loved it. And the next book was another young adult fantasy. It was I Darken by Kiersten, which is the first book in the Conqueror saga. I think that's how these series are called right now. To be honest, it is more historical fiction than fantasy. There's no magic elements in this book. It's a good example of historical fantasy, which basically means that the author is tackling the real historical setting with a couple of changes. In this case, we're presented with fictional characters that are living in a real historical setting. And I found it very fascinating. First of all, the historical part was dealt with very beautifully. I loved every detail and I loved the authenticity of it, but also the characters were different and complex, and I enjoyed each of them. The two point of view characters are a brother and a sister, the heirs of Wallachia, who are sent to the Ottoman Empire in an exchange of peace. Due to their nurturing and temper, they both react differently to their father's betrayal, and we see the story unfold very differently in terms of their reactions. I think this book is both character-driven and plot-driven. I'm really at this point am just in love with the characters and I just want to know what's going to happen next. It really enamored the historical nerd in me, and I don't even need magic and dragons to enjoy it, because it is so perfect the way it is. I loved the characterization of Lada and Radu. Both of them in some way are going against the grain. Lada is naturally masculine, she's aggressive, she likes to fight, she is very violent. And Radu, on the other hand, turns out to be very feminine. He's pretty, well-mannered, kind, and he prefers to get what he wants using his brain and charm instead of using his fists. So it's a very interesting dynamic to read, because we're presented with a sister who's very tough and a brother who's very soft. I just enjoyed this book so much and I really want to make a review for it as well, because I know that a couple of people read it and I really want to discuss it. Then, according to my New Year resolution for 2017, you're going to hear about it a bit later on my channel. I decided to pick up an older fantasy novel, which is The Lightning Thief by Riordan. It's the first book in the Percy Jackson series. Riordan is a very prolific author, and I was puzzled how can he write so many books in a year. And then I read the book and realized that he writes from first person, with a focus on dialogue rather than description, and his books are very short. So now I get it. Obviously, it's not my favorite writing style, to be honest, so I struggled with it a little bit because it seemed too simple for me, but then I realized that it's a middle grade novel. Most middle graders don't like reading a lot of description, so that's why Riordan didn't include it. I realize it. Still, there were a couple of things that I couldn't enjoy because of my age. I think the concept is great, it has a lot of promise for more adventures, but so far the things are thrown into the book just to add action. In every chapter, our characters are facing the challenges that don't have to do with the main challenge at all, and I find that it breaks the flow of the plot. I think that Riordan had all these great concepts about Greek gods he wanted to include, and he didn't have another way to include them but to just insert them without a good reason. But then I understand that it's a middle grade book and I cannot hold it to the same standards as even young adult fantasy. So I think if I were like 12 or 13 I would have really enjoyed it, but now when I'm older I just cannot ignore how simple it is. I'm going to continue with the series because there is a promise of it developing into something more, so we'll see how it's going to play out. So far I'm not disappointed, but I'm not wowed either. Then I read the most beautiful graphic novel ever, which was Blacksad by Juan Diaz Canales. It was such a great graphic novel. I think it was the prettiest one I've read in my entire life, and the story wasn't a bore either. It is set in a world where animals are like humans, sort of like in this Utopia cartoon. They're intelligent and they live in the city instead of wilderness. Our protagonist is Blacksad, who's a black cat and a private eye. He investigates a couple of different cases during the whole length of a graphic novel that have to do with politics, social issues and culture. It is drawn in sort of noir style and the quality of the graphics are just out of this world. I really enjoyed all the stories, especially the ones that had to do with politics. I love the best the one about racism, which is basically a story about a separation of white-furred animals and black-furred animals. I think what made it a good read is the fact that it is still very relevant to our lives, and just a format of a graphic novel that allows you to experience the story in a visual way. And I'm really sad that I didn't have it in a physical form because I would like to own it and went recommended to other people just to hand them the book. That's all the books that I wanted to cover in this video. I also wanted to show you something exceptional, which is the cat in my pocket that doesn't give a fuck. Yeah. It's my favorite short right now. I just cannot deal with how perfect it is. In the comments down below, tell me what you read in October and November. Tell me which books you liked and which disliked, for what reasons, and etc. Thank you for watching this video. I hope to see you soon in my next one. Bye!